ever noticed how certain leaders, even ones separated by decades and continents, seem to be reading from the same script? It's often called the authoritarian playbook. Well, today, using a range of sources, we're going to pull back the curtain and break down that exact pattern step by step to see how it really works. So here's our game plan. First, we'll define what this playbook actually is. Then we're going to dive into how the myth of the strongman leader is built. After that, we'll see how words are turned into weapons, and then look at the classic us versus them strategy. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at the legacy this playbook leaves behind.
All right, let's start with the absolute basics. When we talk about an authoritarian playbook, what are we actually talking about? It's a fantastic question because, this isn't some literal book with a table of contents. It's a pattern. It's a set of strategies and moves that pop up over and over again whenever power is being centralized, no matter where or when. So to really get the playbook, you have to understand the end goal. And our sources define authoritarianism pretty clearly. It's a system that can't stand political competition, that funnels all power to the center, and that chips away at the very foundations of democracy, things like the rule of law and fair elections. That's the destination. But here's the really crucial modern twist. Our sources point out that today's authoritarians often don't need a military coup. Instead, they use the very tools of democracy, elections, courts, laws, to hollow it out from the inside. It's less of a hostile takeover and more like a slow, deliberate demolition from within. So where does a process like that even begin? Well, step one of the playbook is to build a myth. The myth of the strongman. This idea of a single, larger-than-life figure who is the only one who can save the day. And this idea of a carefully manufactured, exceptional leader shows up time and time again. You see it in Mein Kampf, where Hitler paints the leader as a lone genius, fighting against the sluggish masses. And then, in a totally different context, sources describe how Donald Trump's public persona was carefully built into this powerful brand, projecting an image of unparalleled success. The key takeaway here is that in both cases, the public image isn't just who they are, it's a strategic creation. You can see this self-mythologizing crystal clear in Benito Mussolini's own words. Just listen to that language. He doesn't call himself a politician. No, he's a patriot, a preacher, a hero who is single-handedly smashing a threat. He is literally writing his own legend as he goes. And this focus on personality over policy is just absolutely critical. Sources like Peril report that Donald Trump viewed his disruptive persona not just as a personality quirk, but as the very core of his political movement. If he changed, he'd lose his base. In this model, the persona is the entire point. And you can see this same pattern play out in Russia. Sources describe how Vladimir Putin's public image is meticulously managed by state media, which bombards the public with these images of him in all sorts of macho pursuits. It's all designed to project strength and make him the living embodiment of national power. Okay, so once this myth of the strongman is in place, the next move in the playbook is to seize control of the story. It's about controlling the narrative and turning information itself into a weapon. And here is the basic toolkit for doing just that. It's a whole mix of tactics, from the obvious to the subtle. You've got attacking the free press, hammering home simple slogans until they become reality, silencing dissent, and, of course, using social media to completely bypass any kind of fact-checking. This whole strategy puts emotion way ahead of reason. In fact, Hitler himself wrote in Mein Kampf that the biggest changes in the world are driven not by thoughtful written arguments, but by the raw emotional power of the spoken word. It's about whipping up a crowd, not engaging in a debate. And here is that tactic in plain sight. The strategy: label any information you don't like as fake news to completely erode public trust. A perfect example is when Donald Trump called a guilty verdict rigged. He wasn't just disagreeing with the court decision, he was attacking the credibility of the entire justice system and all the media outlets reporting on it. And you just can't overstate the power of repetition. A slogan like "Make America Great Again" works so well because it's simple, it's emotional, and it's incredibly easy to remember. It lets you sidestep all the messy details of policy and create a direct, powerful bond with your supporters. Okay, so once you control the narrative, what's next? You have to mobilize your followers. And the single most effective way to do that is to create a powerful sense of us against them. to pit the real people against some dangerous enemy, either at home or abroad. It's hard to find a more chillingly direct description of this tactic than this one from Mein Kampf. Hitler literally calls it an art to focus all of a nation's anger and fear onto one single enemy. It simplifies every complex problem and unifies a movement against that common scapegoat. And this us versus them story often isn't built overnight. It's a slow burn. This timeline, which is drawn from our sources, shows how Russia, under Putin, systematically framed actions by the West as direct threats and encroachments. Each one of these events was spun into another piece of a growing grievance narrative, which was then used to justify more and more aggressive actions. And to really sharpen that us versus them divide, you have to paint a picture of national disaster. When Donald Trump described American carnage in his inaugural address, it wasn't just a turn of phrase. It was a way to frame the country as a wasteland created by the old establishment, which in turn created an urgent need for a strongman to come in and fix it all.
So, after looking at all these individual pieces, the strongman, the narrative control, the common enemy, what's the big picture? Well, when you step back and look at the sources together, a remarkably clear four-step pattern starts to emerge. Here it is, the playbook boiled down to 4 steps. Number 1, craft the myth of the strongman leader. 2, control the narrative by taking over the flow of information. 3, unify your followers by defining an enemy. And 4, mobilize that base using powerful stories of grievance and national decay. And all of this brings us to one final, absolutely critical question. Our sources lay out a clear pattern from history, but the real challenge for any of us is learning to recognize this playbook not in a history book, but as it's actually happening in real time, because being able to see the pattern is always the first step toward figuring out how to respond to it.